So in our last Enterprise look, we went to the end of Season 2 and talked a bit about how the series needed a soft reboot after the disaster that much of its run had been so far. But building up to that were actually some attempts to save the show, like Regeneration, the Borg one, which, whatever mistakes were made, nevertheless was an interesting change of pace that drew the attention of fans that had abandoned the series by now. To further bank on that success, the episode then proudly declared that coming next time would be a look at the backstory of the series for their 50th episode. A triumph of such magnitude that they were going to make it a double feature and give you an extra episode immediately after the 50th. That episode, which pissed away any goodwill that had been earned by the previous 2 episodes, was Bounty, aka T'Pol Goes Into Heat. The 50th episode in question, though, is First Flight, today's outing, which on the one hand sits in between the much-regarded episode of the week before and the game-changing one that would come the week after, so that's going to leave it open to a lot of unflattering comparisons. On the other hand, standing side by side with Bounty is a bit like entering a club next to Quasimodo. You will in one sense look better by comparison, but also look that much worse by your association with the ugliest guy in the room. But let's eject all of that baggage and look at First Flight on its own merits. Archer is busy being smug because he thinks that they found a dark matter nebula, but T'Pol is skeptical, because that's pretty much her job on the show. After all, this episode makes clear one thing. Nobody has ever proven that dark matter nebulae even exist. Never mind found one, right?
You know him?
Not personally.
We made a run to a dark matter nebula. I helped set up the Graviton telescope.
That seems like a continuity error, but anything that erases early Enterprise episodes from continuity is a good thing in my book. Well, assuming that breaking the ice never happened and thus dark matter nebulae don't necessarily even exist, proving Archer's correct is going to be a very difficult task. It will require very precise scientific examination of the evidence and painstaking efforts to glean whether the data points to dark matter or to something else. So naturally, Archer plans to hurl bombs into the thing. You know, for science, and definitely not because he and Trip just finished off a 6-pack of PBR.
If I can, I should put on a hell of a show.
And this time we don't even have to pretend we're fishing. Archer's joy at being able to hurl explosives at things in the name of astrophysics is interrupted by news from Admiral Forrest that someone named AG is dead. That ends the teaser. I've made a point that oftentimes the short teasers are the best, but in this case, telling me someone we've never heard of before and with no context at all about his significance is now dead leaves a little something to be desired, like, say, any emotional connection whatsoever. After the titles, we learn that Tucker knew him as well, and they're both a bit down at the tragic death of AG. Or maybe it's HE, and they're 2 really big fans of Full Moon. Just when he's about to leave, T'Pol shows up. She's decided to come along because this mission will be a lot more enjoyable for Archer if someone is criticizing him every second they're out here. Not that I disapprove, of course. If she makes Archer 1/10 as miserable as he has made me, she's my new favorite character. But it's going to take a few hours to get there, so she invites him to have a flashback. Talk about what's bothering him. It turns out that AG is short for Captain Robinson, obviously, who not only was slated to captain the NX-02, but was one of the pilots with Archer trying to break the Warp 2 barrier back in the day. Everyone was anxious to be the pilot to pull that off, so Archer was a bit disappointed to find out that he was going to only be backup for AG, who was going to be the first to take a crack at it. So Archer broods over this at the 602 Club with Ruby, the waitress, mentioned back in the episode Shuttle Pod 1. She tries to cheer him up, but there's just no saving Archer's mood.
They'll need a pilot for the next flight.
You remember what Buzz Aldrin said when he stepped on the moon?
No.
Nobody does. Because Armstrong went first.
What? He said beautiful, beautiful, magnificent desolation. The second half is synonymous with the guy, for crying out loud. But I suppose I should be fair to him about not knowing the history of pioneering space flights. After all, I'm an astronaut and Archer just makes stupid videos for the internet. Oh no, wait, that's backwards. Like everything else related to Jonathan Archer. He heads over to congratulate AG anyway. It's only proper that he salute the winner, him and all the rest of the white male test pilots here. Oh, wait, my mistake. They did hide their token woman there behind their token black guy. You would think that the elite pilot corps in a worldwide left-wing utopia would have greater diversity to it than Donald Trump's cabinet. AG takes Archer aside and explains that Archer's overzealousness to be the first is precisely what doomed him.
You burn the midnight oil in that simulator. 18, 20-hour days. You shut everything and everyone out of your life just so you could be the first.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
And you still don't understand. Starfleet doesn't just want a great pilot. They want a great captain.
And wisely, they knew Jonathan Archer was not their man. T'Pol points out they didn't seem much like friends, but Archer just says that it was some friendly competition. Not that they were adversaries or anything like that.
He did have a point. It does take more than piloting ability to command a starship.
And that probably explains why you can't do either. So we watched this historic run, handled in a manner like someone wanted to make an Apollo 13 fan film. I'll make allowances for the fact that their test pilots look to be coming out the other side of middle age. There is only so much you can do with that after all. But if you're creating a futuristic version of Mission Control, you should really look like you have more than 6 people working in what is clearly just a small conference room with a table removed. I mean, take a look at this image of this supposed 22nd century program that's pioneering advanced space flight. This is the most generous shot of Mission Control that they have, and all they have going for them here are a couple big monitors and a guy at a desk. That's it. Don't believe me on that? Think I'm exaggerating on that? Well, imagine for a moment that that monitor Archer is looking at is actually a portable TV rather than a plasma TV. And that monitor on the wall back there is instead just a flat screen sitting on a desktop. And we'll move the tiny monitor and the desk that's in front of the technician over against the wall there. What does it give you when we do all that? The future of manned spaceflight. Apparently the only thing stopping Al-Qaeda from breaking the warp barrier was a trip to Best Buy. As if that wasn't bad enough, they managed to make this historic breakthrough completely mundane. I mean, there is zero drama here. It's not until things start falling apart that anything interesting happens. And keep in mind, I'm such a space nerd that as a kid I memorized the names of the astronauts that walked on the moon in order. They have taken space exploration and made it too dull even for me. But at least this is something that's actually happening. There are problems and AG refuses orders to slow down and his craft blows up, making him the first person to use an escape pod at warp, and the first jackass to break an interstellar spaceship because he's a prima donna. On recovery, AG dismisses the abort command as premature, which shows he's got fairly massive balls to say that when his ship has been reduced to atoms because he didn't. Tucker swoops in, though, and defends the engine, saying it is completely sound from an engineering standpoint, and he will state his reputation as a boat mechanic on that. He immediately gets on Archer's good side by slapping down the Vulcans when they say humanity is trying to move too quickly. So Archer shares a beer with him at the 602 to discuss that and the engine, but mostly just rubbishing the Vulcans. Forrest shows up and joins in the beer and a little bit of the griping, saying that thanks to feedback from the Vulcans, the decision has been made to put the NX program on ice indefinitely.
What do you mean indefinitely?
Well, if in means the opposite, then that means it's the opposite of them definitely doing it. So that means they haven't made up their minds yet. Hot damn! This is the best news I've had since I found a cigarette butt in my beer and Ruby let me have it for free. They believe there's a problem with the engine and it has to be completely redesigned from the ground up, which will mean decades before they ever get out there. But when AG shows up, he agrees that the engine is the problem, completely ruling out the possibility of pilot error, which is not what Archer wants to hear right now. Archer keeps telling him, don't dismiss pilot error. If you rule out pilot error, you give the Vulcans an excuse to shut down the program saying the engine itself is bad. But AG says the engine is bad. So Archer decides to prove how wrong AG is by punching him in the face. Luckily, Tucker thinks quickly and saves the beers before they get spilled. That would have turned this entire shutdown into a true tragedy. Back in the present, the power gets all screwed up, but Archer takes it as a sign that they're in the vicinity of dark matter.
It was probably nothing more than a simple malfunction.
I don't think so. Our pre-launch checks were all fine. Something else caused that surge.
I hope you haven't ruled out pilot error, Archer. T'Pol points out that with the power potentially fluctuating, this could be dangerous.
One thing I learned from AG. You're never going to get anywhere without taking risks.
But you're mourning the death of the guy after he fell while mountain climbing. One thing I learned from Alexander Hamilton, it's never refuse to duel somebody. In the flashback, AG takes a break from the packing to acknowledge that what he said about the Warp 5 engine was a bit dickish. But Archer says that he was right about one thing. Archer wasn't being objective about his father's engine. Opening his eyes allowed him to see what they think is the flaw that can be compensated for and save the NX program. So they have to go talk to Forrest together and convince him. But AG says that all that will do is convince them to run more simulations. The only thing that will truly convince them is to actually fly this thing. Without permission, of course. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, there's no way that two guys can steal a state-of-the-art prototype spaceship from out of the hangar of a government agency. And you would be correct. That's ludicrous. That's why they have three guys, because now it makes perfect sense. Eventually, the ship gets picked up by sensors on New Berlin, so Forrester realizes that somebody managed to steal their incredibly valuable spaceship, so he tries to get them to bring it back. They won't. They're a couple of space cowboys, which is appropriate given that they look to be about 5 years away from fitting in with the cast of that movie.
Archer? Turn around right now and I'll do what I can to keep you out of prison.
If I had a nickel for every time someone should have said that to Archer... They managed to reach Warp 2.5 safely, proving the validity of the engine design and the new intermix system, but still getting their asses chewed out by Forrest when they come back. But the two of them argue that they needed to prove how ready humanity is to go out there and explore. And aside of a slap on the wrist, Starfleet bought it. The NX program went on and succeeded, and eventually they decided to build Enterprise. So now they're out here, firing explosives into a cloud to see what happens. Awe-inspiring. But in the end, it looks like their little excursion worked and they found dark matter, giving us the lesson that scientific discovery is pretty. And the episode ends with them revealing they'll probably name it the Robinson Nebula in honor of the dead guy. So in one way, he'll live forever. In the more actual way, he's still very much dead. Post-episode follow-up. Annoying character goes to Starfleet's incredible penny-pinching of their space program. I'm seriously wondering if Starfleet started out as just a public relations gesture that nobody expected to actually accomplish anything. We have a burn baby burn for the NX Alpha, destroyed thanks to a combination of technical issues and ego. Final score for first flight is 7 out of 10. It is certainly an improvement over the standard Enterprise fare that we've been getting up until this point. And this young Archer is actually a bit more human than the griping asshole that we're normally stuck with. The casting of Keith Carradine as A.G. Robinson was an inspired choice. He walks that fine line necessary to allow his personality to veer into antagonism while not compromising him as a believable friend of Archer. Overall, this is an episode that's effective, but unfortunately, despite the directing skills of LeVar Burton, it doesn't capture the excitement of pioneering spaceflight like it really should. While this episode talks about how the era was kicked off, our next one draws the curtain on another era. Yes, it's all our yesterdays next time.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
But I've never read anything about two Starfleet pilots stealing the Warp 3 prototype.
It wasn't the kind of thing Starfleet Command wanted to advertise.